Hi, everyone. Welcome. We're going to wait maybe 5, 10 minutes just to let people come in, and we'll open up for questions at the end just so that everybody knows. So if you have a question, use the questions function and we'll keep track so that we can get to you at the end. And for now, just sit back and relax until we'll start maybe at 9:05. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for saying hello. This is wonderful to see who's all here. If you're just joining, we're going to start in about a minute. Would love to hear where everybody is coming in from. So feel free to join in the chat. And then just again, if you have any questions along the way for me or for Katherine or for just in general, go ahead and pop those questions into the chat. Hi, Katherine. Can you hear me okay?
I can. I'm here.
Yes, I can hear you too. Wonderful. Wait, look at all of the chat is just popping off, everybody. Okay, let's see what we have. Okay, we've got just over half of everybody here. I think we'll start. So welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for this webinar, Let's Talk Conversations on Building Resilience in the Animal Sector, presented by the Vancouver Humane Society in collaboration with Guelph. So I'm Sarita Lopez, my pronouns are she, her, and I am the program manager for the Trauma Informed Training Program at VHS. So my background is actually in education. I taught for about 5 years. I taught in Edmonton and I taught in Burnaby. And I just gained a lot of experience working with teenagers and elementary age students who unfortunately have experienced a lot of trauma. And so that's sort of where my expertise is. And then, Katherine, I'll go ahead and let you introduce yourself because she is the one who has much more experience in the animal services sector.
Thanks so much, Sarita. Yes, so I'm Katherine Leonard. I am the Manager of Community Programs and Outreach at the Guelph Humane Society. My pronouns are she, her. I have been with the organization since June of 2020. I started here in their Client Services Department, and then I moved into the Community Program and Outreach team about a year and a half ago. So yes, very excited to be here today to talk about some of our experiences that we've had lately.
Awesome. Okay, so just before we get started, we would like to just honor the land that we are living and learning on. So I'm grateful to be listening, learning, and unlearning on the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. And Katherine, I'll just go ahead and let you do yours.
Absolutely. And today I'm attending this meeting from the ancestral lands of the Attawaddaron people and the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit.
So we do encourage you all to learn more about the land that you're living on or the land that you spend lots of time on, just at native-land.ca. It's a really awesome resource where you can see whose land you're on, the languages that are prevalent in that area, and any treaties that are in the areas that you are. Not every land kind of has a treaty necessarily, but you'll see if you have one. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that we can go ahead with our conversation. Okay, so just so that everybody knows as well, just before we get started again, um, we are going to have a surprise draw at the very end of the webinar. So if you do stay, you'll be able to participate in that. We'll have to do the draw after the webinar, but our software will show if you stay. So as long as you stay, you'll be entered. And so we're going to do a bit of a conversation, and then towards the end, we'll do Q&A and discussion. So just make sure you have any notes or something to write with. If you want to take notes during this, I have something I might be taking notes on. And so with that, we're just going to go ahead and get started and have a bit of a conversation. So Katherine, if you could just tell us a bit about you and your organization, that would be a fantastic starting point.
Yeah, definitely. So the Guelph Humane Society, or GHS, as we're sort of commonly known in this area, we serve all of Guelph and Wellington County. So we have quite a large catchment area, and we obviously operate our animal services department out of this. So we do have our animal services team who are contracted by the city to do bylaw enforcement. But then we're also very engaged with our community. We have educational programming, and then of course we're an animal shelter. So we have our adoptions program. We accept surrenders from all over the community, strays, impoundment, all of that. So I know it sort of differs and varies by region and area, but we really are providing sort of a very wholesome service for all of Guelph and Wellington County. So with that, we see a lot of very interesting situations, and we deal with all sorts of animal-related topics and themes.
Yeah, I'd love to hear more about how you build relationships in your community. What kind of presence do you have?
Yeah, absolutely. So, one thing that we, in the last couple of years, we've really been able to build up, and it's one of the main sort of goals of my role here. We have our GHS Cares program. So it's a portfolio of programs, all of which are intended to provide additional support to the community, and to really just make sure that we have that sort of presence. I think, there's that animal shelter stigma oftentimes with a lot of the work that we do, and people see us as enforcement and impoundment. Obviously, those are very important services that we offer, but the GHS Cares programs have really allowed us to connect with the community in a much bigger way, and connect with a lot of our community partners as well. So just for some context, one of our programs with GHS Cares is called Pets in Transition. And it's a program that offers longer term boarding opportunities for the pets of those who are fleeing domestic violence. We've actually partnered with the Canadian Mental Health Association in the last couple of years. So if anyone is seeking treatment for mental health or addiction and is looking at a longer term hospital stay or stay in a rehabilitation facility, we are able to house their pets off-site in a foster home. We have a wonderful foster network that allows us to do that. And obviously the goal of that is that just so that the pets can have those sort of the comfort of home and, have somewhere safe and loving and caring while their owners are, dealing with very difficult life circumstances, and the goal of which is obviously reunification. We also have our emergency boarding program, which historically was 72 hours of free boarding for urgent crisis situations. In the last year, we've been able to extend that to about a 10-day boarding program because we were finding that, 72 hours just really wasn't enough time for community members to, figure out another option for their pets or to recover from whatever crisis that they've been dealing with. And that program, it's everything from someone has a house fire and they are, displaced from their home and they had pets in the home and they need somewhere for them to stay temporarily, to if somebody is rushed to the hospital and, there's a dog left behind and paramedics will call us and we will go and offer that no cost boarding for their pets as well. Again, with the goal of reunification, we don't want any of these sort of crisis situations to necessarily be a barrier for someone, being reunited with their pet at the end of it. So, and, with all of this, it's just given us so many opportunities to work with, Guelph Police and the Community Paramedicine Program, Canadian Mental Health Association with outreach workers and caseworkers. And we've noticed that there's been a steady increase in the number of community partners who will now just reach out with questions. Hey, I have a client, this is the situation, what can you recommend? Oh, I have a client, they're having a tough month. Do you have any food that you could, provide for their cat or their dog? So it's really allowed us to just kind of have that presence in the lives of people in the community and in a much bigger way, more so than just, okay, your animals are here, we'll take care of our animals. It's allowed us to have a much more kind of holistic approach to how we're helping the animals and, indirectly helping their owners as well.
That sounds amazing. I think that's fantastic. I also love that the goal is reunification, especially for, you mentioned people who are experiencing mental health troubles or houselessness or domestic violence. And I think it's sort of, it's a tricky situation when we're thinking about having to reunite an animal with an owner who may or may not have the resources to take care of that animal. And I just think it's great that we have the value of wanting that to happen and seeing what we can do to help the person. I'm also curious, just kind of a follow-up question. You mentioned that organizations are reaching out to GHS now, which is fantastic. It sounds like you've really established a presence so people know who you are. And I'm just curious what other organizations, like maybe not necessarily like you don't need to name them, but like what types of organizations or people are reaching out? Is it mostly other animal services or social services?
I would say social services, medical services, really anyone who may be working with anyone in the community who has a pet, right? Like those conversations, people are proud about their pets. It's the number one thing, we're all pet owners. We love to talk about our pets. And I think if anyone's having, a difficult discussion about something else going on in their life, I think very often the pet comes up in that discussion. And I think that just speaks to the importance of the human animal bond. What we have really sort of come to learn and in the last few years, I think specifically, having come through, the COVID pandemic and all, isolation and everything that came with that, it's just how important pets are to people. Pets are family. And just as you need to care, you need to look out for your family and care for your family when your house burns down or when you suddenly have to, be rushed to the hospital. People are looking out for their pets as well, but they didn't necessarily have an answer or have a place for their pets to go. So I think it's just nice to know that now, the initial reaction is call GHS and they can talk you through it or they can help or they can advise.
That's fantastic. Yeah. I think that is something we talk about a little bit in our training in terms of like creating a network with other organizations that might need help in terms of like working with their clients or something like that. And I think it's fantastic that you've kind of started that presence so that other organizations are aware that you have those resources and that you can support people in those tough situations. That's fantastic. Thanks for sharing about that.
Yes, of course.
You mentioned also that you're working with police. And so I just was wondering how would you, or how do you currently address the distrust of services like the police because of historical, cultural, intergenerational trauma? How do you handle that right now?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a topic that comes up quite regularly. I mean, our animal services officers, they're peace officers. They have a full uniform. They wear their bulletproof vest. We always bring them into our children's educational programs to talk about the work that they do. And the number one thing every kid says is, you look like a police officer, because they do. So they have a very sort of similar presence, which could obviously be, quite triggering for people. And what I will say about our animal services team is they are the most compassionate group of individuals that I think I've ever had the pleasure to work with. And I think it's so important. One of the things we value the most here is transparency. And, really making sure that we are explaining things in full, that we are, if there's an emergency boarding contract that needs to be signed, that we are going over that with somebody, and really just fully explaining, what is happening, what will be happening. We also, we're working on getting everyone certified in mental health first aid. We have done training in de-escalation strategies as well. Just recognizing how important it is to approach those situations that can be very, very distressing, for both our team and for the individuals involved. And how can we make those a much more positive experience? And ultimately, often sometimes handing their pet over to us, and there's a huge amount of trust that needs to happen to, for that person to feel okay with that. So I think just that, the importance of that transparency and just that sort of putting people's minds at ease and having communication as well. Once a pet is in our care, the owners often do have a lot of questions, a lot of concerns. So making sure that, our client services team, there are, our frontline kind of team members on the phones, making sure that they're always aware of a situation, that we've sort of given them a heads up about what's going on so that they can just make sure that they're communicating as effectively as they can so that, people really understand what's going on and the nature of the program that their pet is in, and providing that reassurance to the community, I think, is really important.
Yeah, I think you've highlighted a lot of the key aspects of what we would call trauma-informed practices, which is fantastic. Just talking about that open communication and transparency and really letting everybody know what's going on. You mentioned your like the customer service team and then also the individual accessing services, so everybody's on the same page. That's super important. And I think just something I want to highlight too is that we're not I know that it's tough because so many animal services organizations will need to work with a legal body of some kind, and so there are limitations to what you can do and what maybe you can help a person with in terms of like not necessarily feeling like you want to talk to the police about what's going on but having to. And so I think talking about that transparency and communication is just the best that we can do in terms of like harm reduction when somebody's coming to you, maybe they don't trust the police, and just being like, well, this is what I have to do, but this is how we can try and support you through that. That sort of sounds like the approach that you're taking. I think that's fantastic. My next question for you kind of is related to this, but more like broad. So what do you think, why is cultural safety important and essential for the animal services sector in particular?
Yeah. Again, I think it just goes back to that trust. I think trust is so important, and transparency. Like we always say it's the number one thing, whether someone's calling in for, to find out the outcome of injured wildlife that they called in about, or, whether it's someone calling, regarding one of our programs. I just think it's so important to go into every situation being so mindful of not knowing their experiences. And that's where, we participated in the Trauma Informed Care series back in the summer. And, our conversations about that after were that it was so sort of reassuring to hear, or really kind of reinforced, that we are all unique and we all have very different triggers and traumas, and we can never even begin to know, especially when it is someone that we do not know on a personal level, we can never begin to know what they've been through. And I think too, we see the animal, the animal is the focus, and obviously that is, that is why we are here. That is the premise of everything that we do. I think the trauma-informed care approach has really provided us with that sort of insight and, the knowledge to be able to take a step back and think, okay, well, what are all the other factors here? We may see an animal who is underweight, which obviously that is a medical concern, that's a health concern, that's something that we need to be mindful of and we need to address. But then when you start to take a step back, perhaps the owner is dealing with food insecurity. It could be that they're having to decide whether they feed themselves or feed their pet. And how can we help? How can we help to change that situation? We can provide food, we can provide some education, we can make sure they're connected with their local, food bank or community services. And it's just that, I think it can be very quick to judge a situation when it's in front of you and it's, when it's an animal, and obviously it's very hard to not feel that, but just, okay, take a step back. What else do you think might be going on? And why do you think the animal might look this way? It's usually not because the owner doesn't love their pet. It's because the owner can't afford food, or there's an underlying medical concern and they can't afford vet care. So it's that sort of benefit of the doubt has really kind of resonated with all of us. And I noticed that just as we're dealing with these situations, everyone is a little bit more able to kind of take it all in as a whole, I think, and understanding of all of the different factors that go into an animal's life and a person's life.
Totally, yeah. And I mean, there's lots of different relationships that people have with animals that will look different depending on different cultures and things like that too. So I'm not saying that like we want it to be okay if an animal were to come in underweight. That's not really what I'm saying, but just we just don't know the whole picture. And I really like that you kind of highlighted that as like just the key to, a trauma-informed and culturally safe practice is just recognizing that we don't know. And you're right, it's very easy to judge and sort of make those quick judgments. I mean, that's human, that's what we do. But in the line of work that you're in, it's just so important to be able to like identify when that's happening so that you can take that step back, like you mentioned. Could you speak a little bit to the nuances of the animal's well-being and then keeping pets with their people a little bit more, just on that topic?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is something that we regularly deal with, and it's a conversation that we have a lot. And I firstly want to say I'm so proud that it's a conversation that we have a lot, because I just think it speaks to how topical it is, in the animal services field, but also, how much we care about the animal's well-being, but also how mindful we want to be of those different circumstances. So now I know it differs by province. Here we have the provincial animal services. So anything to do with cruelty, neglect, welfare, it's actually, the province has the authority to investigate those things, whereas previously it was sort of our SPCA officers who worked out of the shelter. And that change came about in January of 2020. Now, what was really interesting recently, I was talking with one of my colleagues who worked here prior to January of 2020. I've worked here since, so I've never known it any other way. And one thing that they were saying is, the difference between then and now, there are still people who are able to investigate and, anything to do with animal cruelty, neglect. But the difference is because they're no longer operating out of our shelter here, it's harder to kind of know what the end result is. And there's a lack of closure. So, I mean, we know that the appropriate authorities are responding in the appropriate ways. We always, file reports as needed. It's our due diligence. But then it sort of feels like we never know what happens often. And it was interesting to hear that perspective of, we know that the animals are, being cared for, and we know that the right people are making the right decisions for those animals. We don't have the closure. Whereas previously, the people able to make those decisions and kind of have that follow through worked right out of the shelter. So it's just been a very interesting shift that's, prompted a lot of kind of conversations about handling those situations where, yes, we return a pet to an owner, but potentially we have to report a welfare concern, and sort of then the province takes over the authority to do that. Now they're, so fantastic at what they do, and we have complete faith and trust that the right decisions are being made. We just don't know what those decisions are. So it was just interesting to hear that perspective and it highlighted just, there's that lack of closure. We get so invested in these situations, and then that's it.
I'm so curious about kind of what drove that change. I mean, I know that you don't necessarily know why, but
what's wonderful about it is it's really meant that anything to do with animal cruelty or, welfare, there's now a standardized approach, right? Like they work in the province, it's the province of Ontario. And it just means that it's essentially making sure that these situations are dealt with, at the legal level that is appropriate to deal with them. So it's been really great it's been great for Ontario, but definitely was a shift in.
Yeah, for sure. I kind of wonder, and I just saw that Angie commented here in the chat, I can imagine a possible connection between lack of closure and professional well-being. Do you think you could speak to that a little bit? Do you notice, I mean, I know you said you weren't here before, but has anyone kind of talked to you about what that feels like as, staff going through that change and experiencing, maybe having to make a call, but then not hearing what happens?
Yeah, well, I think lately, I mean, and in the last few months since we did the trauma-informed care series, often I find that people, we're having a lot of dialogue. We're having a lot of discussions about these things. We're having debriefs about things after the fact. Just wanting to be mindful of the fact that maybe something that didn't affect me as much might have affected a colleague a little bit more, and making sure that you have that kind of healthy discussion if needed or as wanted after the fact. So, I think it's sorry, I've completely lost my train of thought.
No, you're good. Yeah, I was just, I guess, thinking about how that sort of change would affect staff. And I guess we could just go into like a bigger conversation about how do we build resilience and then combat the compassion fatigue, and then, continue to provide compassion in those situations, knowing that you might not be able to find out what happened. So I'm curious, how has GHS been working to build resilience and kind of reduce that compassion fatigue in the last while?
Definitely. Well, I know one sort of emotion and feeling that we often hear people say, and it's a word that we use all the time. I say it as well, is I'm so frustrated, right? And it's not anger, it's not sadness, it's frustration. Now, one thing I have noticed kind of walking through the halls, if you're just kind of checking in with people about a situation, is, and we joke that this is that sort of, the stereotype of the Canadian way is to apologize for everything, right? We say sorry. We're constantly saying sorry. But I find that people say, I'm sorry, I'm so frustrated, or I'm sorry, I'm so mad at the situation, or I'm sorry, I feel so upset by the situation. So, I mean, the number one thing I always say is do not feel sorry. These are human emotions. Like,
totally.
Everyone is entitled to their feelings. Everyone is entitled to have different reactions and different responses to things. Just because, your colleague might not feel as affected by something and you don't need to apologize for that. So I think really normalizing feelings and normalizing talking about feelings and just making it an everyday part of life, and an everyday part of the work that we do. So, I mean, after a difficult situation, going up to, and I think it, all the work that we're doing to kind of build resiliency, and I'll talk a little bit about our monthly training sessions later on, but all of the work that we're doing, what I found is it's kind of really unified us. So, I mean, we obviously have lots of different departments. We have our development team, we have our animal care team, animal services, I'm in community programs, and we all do very different things here, obviously all with a very common goal. But sort of normalizing having discussions about things has really kind of unified our entire team. So what I find is, someone from development is, notices that someone from animal care might be having a tough day, and they'll say, "Oh, did you just need to talk about it? I heard about the situation, that must be tough." And it's really kind of helped to unify us as a team. And in doing so, I think we all have a better understanding of the different roles that we all play. So, and I think when you really truly appreciate, the role that animal care played in a certain case, or the role that animal services played, or client services, it can really help, to kind of have that compassion for each other, and to recognize and understand why someone might be having an off day. Someone's not really feeling chatty, someone's, upset. And then the sort of second part is, how do we come back into work the next day, right? Like it's good to have these feelings. It's normal. It's healthy. Let's talk about them. If you want to talk about them, that's obviously not everyone's thing. But then what's the next step? How do we make it so that tomorrow can be a better day? And tomorrow we can kind of face the next challenge together. And that togetherness, I think, has been it's been really impactful.
Yeah, really creating that culture of connectedness at work so that folks are feeling supported, and like able, like you said, able to process their feelings and then kind of figure out what's next. Because I think it's really common to feel like feeling that frustration is bad. Brooklyn just mentioned it's been a game changer to stop looking at some emotions as bad or things I need to stop feeling, and instead to start looking at them as logical emotional reactions to circumstances. That way, I can now focus on managing my reactions and actions to those emotions, but just allowing the emotions to happen. And that's such a really good, that's just exactly what we're saying, that, it's okay to feel however you're feeling, especially if, if it's a decision that you have to make that maybe you don't agree with, it's going to be hard. And then it's sort of what's next after that. So I guess, how has Guelph Humane been implementing the things that you've learned from the workshops that you've done with us as part of addressing that? How are you addressing the mental health of individuals in your organization right now? Kind
Yeah,
of like, what is the next step that you have
it's
organized?
such a big question. And when we sort of a few months ago, when we started to talk about, okay, so we do and have historically held monthly team training sessions. It's the last Wednesday of every month. The entire shelter actually shuts down for 3 hours so that everybody who works in the shelter is able to come together. And, we'll have a guest speaker in on, something pertaining to wildlife, or somebody from the province will come and speak to the legislation. But in the last few months, we've really been trying to cater our team training sessions to mental health and compassion fatigue and resiliency. And the first step for us was really about the awareness behind that. So what is compassion fatigue, right? And I mean, we did your compassion fatigue webinar, and that was a really great sort of introduction to, okay, what is it? It's kind of like, why are we feeling this way? And then obviously trauma-informed care played into that as well. And then moving forward, I mean, we're looking to have everybody certified in mental health first aid, because that's something that's just really, really, I think it's very topical right now. I think it's such an important thing. And I think having that first aid certification really provides a much better understanding of some of the challenges that some of the vulnerable community members that we're working with every day might be going through and experiencing. So having those team training sessions together has been really great. But it's, when we first sat down and said, okay, let's build resilience. Like, how do we do this? Where do we start? It's a big topic. It is such a huge topic. And we were like, can this be one training session? No way. Like, it can't even be two. It's like a year-long endeavor that every single month is something a little bit different, whether it's mindfulness. What is mindfulness? We talk about square breathing. We talk about, that sort of a thing. One thing we wanted to be very mindful of is different things work for different people and different things appeal to different people. So how do we sort of address that? Everyone's very individual, very unique. What works for me might not work for someone else. Do we want to talk about yoga and maybe have a yoga day one day? Absolutely. Is everyone going to love that? Maybe not. So then the next session can be something that's a little bit more applicable. So, I mean, we'll send out a survey. We like to kind of check in with the team and like, how are you feeling about these sessions? What would you like to see more of? What would you like to see less of? I mean, it's, we never want to assume that we know what's going to work for everybody and that we are right and that we have the right answer, because there's no right answer. It's so individual to every single person. But then, we kind of took a step back and recognized as well, and it was a survey result. Everybody in our team loves donuts and ice cream and coffee. And, we always say, like, coffee and donuts is not going to fix compassion fatigue. It's not enough. There's not enough.
Check, we're done.
Pretty surprising people randomly. We had an ice cream truck show up one day in the summer after one of our team. It was actually after the trauma-informed care webinar.
Oh, lovely.
So we were like, this might be a little bit heavy. We're going to have some healthy discussion. It ended, an ice cream truck rolled up, like playing music and everything. And it made people's day because A, we got ice cream, but B, we all hung out for half an hour, eating our ice cream, just talking, getting to know each other. And we noticed that those tiny little actions, it's kind of like those random acts of kindness, those do slowly, over time really make a difference. It improves morale overall. And with that improved morale, you're going to kind of be able to come in and face the next day a little bit stronger. And while also recognizing that ice cream doesn't fix things, right? So finding that balance of, making sure the team feels really recognized and appreciated and just having those fun, light moments. But then also, doing mental health first aid cert and really making sure that we are giving people a really good foundation from which to kind of build on and just kind of be stronger people professionally and personally as well. Of course, we have our EAP, and that's something we talk about all the time. We are constantly encouraging people to access the EAP, to check it out. There's some great resources. And with that kind of open door policy of if anyone doesn't know, come see me, come find me. I will walk you through it. We'll do a shared screen on Teams, and we can show you how to access things. We really just want to make sure that this is a topic that's good to talk about and no one's scared to talk about it and everyone's really comfortable because we're now talking about it all the time, right? It's just, it's ingrained in our everyday and the work that we do.
Totally. And I think it's great to have policies and then also activities like you've said. And I think it's true that having a donut day and ice cream day isn't going to necessarily fix everything, but if we're kind of acknowledging that we have a tough thing happening, so let's add something fun at the end of it, it's just such a good way to show some appreciation for the type of work that folks are doing, because doing this, even having this conversation right now, is taking an emotional toll, right? Like, we're having a hard conversation. And so it's really good that that's kind of an option. And I mean, I'd encourage anyone to kind of do that for themselves. If you know that you're going to have a hard day, then clear your evening and, I don't know, maybe order food or just have something easy or treat yourself to ice cream or something like that. That seems very kind of surface level, but it's whatever you need. It's honestly, you don't have to do any of the things that I've suggested. It's just whatever feels right for you, right? And I'm glad that you pointed that out as well, in terms of, what works for you might not work for everyone else. Especially when we're thinking about things that have a cultural context, like yoga or like even counseling and therapy. Those aren't things that might feel accessible to people, or might just not feel right. I know that I identify as South Asian and Canadian, and if yoga were offered, I wouldn't really know if I feel comfortable with it or not, just because of the way that yoga has sort of turned up in a weird colonial way in our society. Not that I'm saying it's bad, it's just like acknowledging that maybe some people are going to feel different about certain activities or not. And I'm glad also that you mentioned debriefing, because that is so important. Just being able to talk to someone after something's gone on, and having that kind of available, and having the open door policy is always such a good, I mean, not necessarily for everybody, but a great idea, just so folks know that you're there. Is there are there any policies that you have right now that you think you would change, or anything you'd recommend other folks to try? I know that in our training, we definitely recommend having wellness days in addition to sick days and vacation days, but I know that that's not necessarily always possible. So I'm just curious kind of how you approach that piece of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, here we have vacation days and personal days, and there's been a lot of discussion, and it's ongoing, and I think it will continue to happen about what constitutes a personal day and what is self-care, right? And how does that look, and how it looks different. It looks different for everybody. So it's definitely something that we, as an organization, are kind of trying to look at from a more holistic approach. And it's part of it is we all have to work together on this, and we all have to take these small steps. But we also recognize that, there are those of us in leadership positions here that we need to also make sure we're making really appropriate decisions, and just being mindful of different ways that we can support our team. So I would say it's just an ongoing discussion. It's something that's kind of, really topical lately with us. And it's something that we continue to talk about on a regular basis. How can we best support people? Even if I, say we have to deliver, bad news to a client about their pet, the person delivering that news, giving particular to saying, hey, I know this might be this might be an extra difficult day for your team. I just wanted to make you aware so that, you can kind of be aware of how they might be feeling today versus, if they didn't know, right? I think,
Right.
our communication is really fantastic. And that's one thing that we really pride ourselves on, is just really communicating effectively with everyone. But again, just it's sort of having that mindfulness of, this is probably going to be a harder day for one team than another. How can the team, how can the rest of the team support that team today? And then it switches, right? Everyone has tough days, everyone has tough, things that they need to do. So just really kind of helping to support as and when needed.
Right, totally. And that's a good point too, that it's going to shift throughout the organization. I'm curious, I guess, what practices for the trauma-informed approach stood out to you, and kind of maybe what 3 takeaways are that you've implemented so far. I guess maybe speak to that and the impact that it's had on your organization.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I know one thing that came up, sort of one of the trauma-informed practices that was recommended, was having a safety plan. Now, it was very much having an individual safety plan, which is obviously something that we've talked about, we've encouraged. It's entirely up to everyone, what that safety plan looks like for them. It's something that's very personal, but that certainly, I think, was a great approach. We have a safety plan for physical health. We have first aid kits, in case something happens. We have fire extinguishers in our kitchens at home in case there's a fire. What are we, what safety net, what plan do we have for the other ways that we can be affected by some of these situations? So it's kind of proactively thinking about, what will you do, or what can you do, or what are you best to do? So, I know, I have a select group of friends. They're my people. If I've had a really tough day, pick up the phone, give them a call, because I'm someone who just likes to, believe it or not, as I chat away. But it's different for everybody. So we love the concept of having that safety plan, the way that you have a first aid kit or you have a fire extinguisher. And one big sort of takeaway from that was recognizing that stress is not the problem. And I remember that stuck out to me as we were doing our training. Stress is not the problem. Stress is healthy. Stress is a normal human response, right? But just sort of thinking about how we work through that. So I think someone in the chat already mentioned that it's, sort of acknowledging those feelings, processing those feelings, and then having that understanding of those feelings is so helpful for, moving into kind of the next phase. But debriefs, I think, are just so important. And we don't do it in a very, obviously sometimes we call a meeting and we sit down, but debriefs can be really, we don't ever want them to be confrontational. It can be very scary, like, come into my office, sit down at the desk, we're going to have a big discussion about something.
Yes.
So even just let's take a dog for a walk. Let's go hang out with the bunnies for a few minutes, and let's just have an organic conversation. Let's just have a really non-confrontational, easy chat about what's going on, about how you might be feeling. But let's do it in a way that isn't a big, scary interview type setting. It's just a much more organic conversation, because then it also makes all of those conversations feel more natural and organic. Kind of having that approach as well has really helped us.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you mentioned that. Changing the environment is a great way to kind of even just calm your nervous system down a little bit, in terms of getting out of where you've been experiencing all of that. So that's a really lovely way to do that, and encouraging kind of, again, just that human connection. You're going for a walk or hanging out with the animals or something. That's such a good way to do that debrief. Thanks for sharing that.
For sure. And it's so rare. Very few workplaces have bunnies that you can just go snuggle with.
That sounds so nice.
Have dogs you can take for a walk, right? We're so fortunate that we truly can be like, that was a hard phone call. I'm going to go snuggle a cute animal for a couple of minutes.
Totally.
And we feel very fortunate that we have the opportunity to do that here, for sure.
Yeah, that's lovely. I know that I do that with my cat all the time. He's been running around all over the place in the background. But yeah, totally. Okay, with the last kind of about 20 minutes, I'd like to look at these questions and see if we can have a little discussion. Okay. So the first one here is, how do you deal with what people often call hoarding situations, and therefore all the animals must be removed and the person prevented from owning animals again, when in fact looking after the animals is giving purpose in life?
Yeah, that's a really difficult situation. It's definitely one that comes up a lot. Now, here in Ontario, that's something that the Provincial Animal Welfare Services would step in, and they would take over a case like that. With that said, we are often also kind of in conversations with with the owners. And I mean, for example, we had the opportunity to run a no-cost spay neuter clinic this past year, which was tremendous. It was great. We are working towards our goal of providing spay or neuter surgeries at no cost to 300 pets, which, as I'm sure everyone here knows, can be very, very impactful. But one of the fantastic things about a program like that is, if someone has 3 cats in their home, 2 males and a female, we all know what's going to happen. And that situation is very quickly going to get it unmanageable and get a little bit out of control. So, if it is a situation where it's hoarding, it's like, okay, well, is it just because they can't afford to spay and neuter these pets? And obviously you were not in a position to spay or neuter 30 cats or 40 cats. But, potentially providing the surgeries to 2 or 3 of the pets, so that the owner can continue to have some pets in their life. It's so important to us, and it's obvious, it's so obvious that pets are so important to that individual, or very often in situations like this, hoarding is a disorder. So making sure, first of all, that they have the appropriate community support, that they have an outreach worker, caseworker, somebody who's helping, who's kind of helping them through that. But then also seeing if we can, make it so that they can have 1 or 2 pets, and 1 or 2 pets who are not going to be able to have more pets. So that was really nice, sort of, that was something that was really great that came out of our spay neuter program. It wasn't necessarily the intention, and there was only a few cases where we were able to help out in that way. But, it felt like we were able to provide that comfort, that human-animal bond, protect the human-animal bond, but obviously making sure that that all of the animals are safe and healthy in the process.
Yeah, it kind of sounds like really just getting down to the root of the problem. You mentioned that it could be they're just lacking resources or support, or it could be some kind of mental health issue. So it's really kind of identifying what that is and working with the individual to figure out what they really need, it sounds like, and then offering that to them. Thank you. We have a number of questions here. Hold on, one more. Or a couple more. Hopefully we have time. Okay. The next one is from Melissa. And would you share how you facilitate a debrief without the meeting becoming a group airing of grievances? Is it simply a safe space for staff to openly share feelings, or is there a specific outcome or goal in mind?
That's a really awesome,
great question. Yeah.
I'm like, oh, that's tough. You are often walking that fine line of there's healthy venting and then there's ranting, and one is productive and one is not. So, and I think with, now that this is something that we do more often and we're more kind of familiar with it, I think we're all able to sort of identify when maybe what started as just a really healthy conversation or a bit of a vent in a healthy, productive way starts to turn a little bit negative, which is, again, it's just kind of a natural human thing, but being able to just kind of bring it back to, okay, what is the issue here? But it is tough. It is tough. I mean, I find, I have someone who works closely in my department, who sort of understands, often the situations that I'm dealing with and some of the things I'm doing. So I will go to her and say, oh, I'm just feeling really frustrated. Do you have a couple minutes? Like, I just kind of want to talk this out. But one of the most recent training sessions that we did, it was called Challenging Negative Thinking. And CMHA is fantastic. They have so many different resources. And this is a webinar that CMHA offered to us. And it was a little bit sort of the introduction to cognitive behavioral therapy. But I love that it was called Challenging Negative Thinking, because when you start to think of your thinking as negative or positive, it's a lot easier to shift it from negative to positive. Like, just having it called something is like, oh, that was a really negative thought. Okay, how can I make it a more positive thought? How can I make it a productive thought? So I think that training session, it was fascinating. It was very interesting. But I think people now catch themselves when they start to go really negative and they go from a productive, positive place to a negative place. So I think, team training sessions, that kind of a dialogue is really important and was certainly very helpful to us. Without having everybody go and, sit down in therapy and do cognitive behavioral therapy, which we just can't, it's just not possible for us to send everyone to do that necessarily. We sort of had a little introduction to what it is. And so I think that certainly I would recommend that webinar to anyone, because it helps to shift your mindset from that, like, really not productive, just wanting to rant and vent. And we all have those moments in those days, to like, okay, let's give this situation the benefit of the doubt. Let's be a little bit more productive about this. why are you feeling this way? This is why you're feeling that way. So yeah, having that training really was beneficial for us, for sure.
Yeah, totally. It's practicing the naming and noticing first, so that you can kind of zoom out of what's happening in your mind. I would love if you could, if you have a moment to share the maybe the name of that again. The name of the webinar was Challenging Negative Thinking. We just have somebody asking who it was from here.
I guess I could put it in the chat, couldn't I?
If you have a second.
Really?
Yes. Okay, I'm just going to see if we have more questions. I think we have a couple more. Okay, while you're doing that, I'm just going to read the next question here. This one is from Susan. Question about Guelph Humane's programs, especially the boarding approaches. Do you place orders on a pet if a health issue is identified when that pet comes into the shelter? How do you approach this regarding breaking of trust and criminalization of vulnerable clients?
Yeah, that's a really fantastic question. I mean, the way it works here is while the animal is in our care, I mean, it's not until the animal is returned to the owner that essentially PAWS would be able to go in and issue those orders to comply with, whether it's vet care that's needed, medical care. I mean, whenever we do have to, and we have a duty to report anything to do with, welfare, cruelty. But whenever we are making that call to the Provincial Animal Welfare Services, we do always tell the person and let them know. Because, we never want someone to be blindsided and think, oh, I trusted GHS, and all of a sudden this person's at my door issuing me orders. So we do always say, just because of, we do have the following concerns. These are the concerns we have. These are the reasons why we have them. We have an obligation to report. We have a duty to report. So we have filed a report. An officer will come and follow up with you. And usually, I mean, it's not always the news that everybody wants to hear, but it speaks to that transparency. Like, it's so important to us that we're letting someone know, yes, we made that call. This is why we made that call. This is why we had to make that call. And we ultimately want what's best for your pet. And we know that you do too, right? We try to sort of bring it back to, this is about your pet. This is about the animal.
Right.
But those conversations are definitely always difficult, but so important. I mean, legally, we have a duty to report, but we also need to make sure that animal, when they go back to their owner, we need to make sure that they are also being properly cared for. And
absolutely,
and we provide resources too, and that speaks to that, offering food bank services and, referring wherever as needed. Often if there's any sort of behavioral concern with a pet, we'll say, we'll refer you to our behavior coordinator. You can have a session with her, because we just really want to let them know that we do ultimately want to be able to help both the person, but, importantly, the animal.
Yeah, absolutely. It sort of sounds like almost like healthy boundary setting, saying like, this is what I have to do as part of my role, but I really do want to serve you. And so in order to maybe prevent this from happening in the future, or maybe make sure you get your animal back, here are some resources where you can do some further learning. That sounds like making an approach that sort of minimizes the traumatic response that a person might go through when feeling like their animal's just being taken from them.
Exactly. And speaking to those boundaries as well, I mean, that's a conversation that we have a lot, because we do become very trusted people, especially when someone's involved in one of our boarding programs. They call for an update, and oftentimes there are a lot of other things going on in their lives, and they see us as friendly, kind, compassionate people who are caring for their pet. But we also have to be very mindful that we are not social workers. We are not therapists. We are not, we can, we're happy to talk through a difficult discussion. We do have a little bit of training, in various different fields, but also really making sure that, we are not becoming the only person that person has to talk to, and, referring them to the appropriate person to talk to. And that can help too, once we return the pet to the owner. If we have had to make a report, it kind of takes it's the next step. It's like, okay, we are no longer really involved in this. Your pet's not in our care anymore, but I want to make sure you are able to still have this discussion. Who are you talking to? Here are some resources. So it's finding that balance between obviously wanting to listen and be compassionate and understanding, but also recognizing that we do have limits and we do have boundaries. and setting those boundaries as best we can. So that's been certainly something that we talk about a lot.
Right. And it takes practice, of course.
Definitely.
We have a chat that came through that is a question. Jen asks, regarding debriefing from tough situations in such a fast-paced environment where so many of us are struggling with staffing shortages, how can we make the time to have these conversations?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I mean, we often say, the last Wednesday of the month. Sometimes you think, oh my gosh, I have like 20 emails I need to write. Sometimes it feels like you have more pressing things that you need to do, which is why we're quite rigid about it. It's mandatory training. If you are scheduled to work, the expectation is you are at that training. It's why we shut down our main lobby. We will definitely respond to urgent calls. Our animal services team are still able to do that. I apologize. I just got an emergency alert on my phone. It was distracting.
Oh, no. Okay.
Yes, but it's you sort of have to just make that time. And sometimes it doesn't feel like the most pressing thing, the most important thing. But if you push one, if you skip one, if you think, oh, it's not important this month, let's wait to the next month, let's wait to the next month, it's kind of like then it doesn't happen. So it is definitely not easy. I think staffing shortages we're all sort of dealing with in one way or another, sort of across the entire field. But it's really just making that time. And if it's if someone else has to help clean, an animal run so that we can get the meeting started on time, so be it, right? It's kind of all hands on deck. How do we make this happen? Now, with that said, we also recently had a survey, and one of the questions was, how do you feel about the length of team training? And it was kind of a 50-50 split. Half the people were like, yeah, it's really great. Half said, actually, it can be a little bit long sometimes. We feel stressed to get our work done afterwards. Obviously, the last thing we want to do is cause stress. That's sort of the opposite of our intention. So now we're sort of, instead of a 3-hour session, we might do a 2-hour session and kind of mix it up a little bit, just to try and be mindful that we are all very busy and have a lot of things that we need to get done in a regular day.
Totally. And I think that comes through with the debriefing practice as well, is there's never an easy answer. It's not a one size fits all kind of solution with making time. But it is, I would call it more of like a cost benefit analysis if we're going to get really technical about it. Just is the idea of a debrief feels like it's not as like tangible as something else that you do in terms of what the result might be. But it's one of those things where if we invest the time for like a 10-minute walk around the block or something like that right now, that can go such a long way in supporting the individual who's asking for the debrief, and then kind of, what's the word, like a ripple effect throughout the team if we are making that time for a quick break or something. And I mean, it doesn't mean that you have to always be available. And again, like, we can set boundaries. Maybe you're not the right person at that time, or you're having a tough day. So, you can say, thank you so much for reaching out to me. I don't think that I can be available for you right now, but is there someone else or something like that? Kind of, maybe now isn't the right time or something.
Really.
In terms of, trying to make the time it's just a struggle. So I hope that is sort of a helpful kind of conversation about that, even though it's not, this is the solution kind of thing. All right, we have a couple more minutes here. Lots of thank yous. Thank you. Let's just move. I'm just going to share my screen again, just so that you can all see where you can find more information about both Guelph Humane and then Vancouver Humane's training program. Just a moment. There we go. So if you're interested in learning more, Vancouver Humane Society is offering free online training courses for all organizations and facilitated workshops for animal services organizations in Canada. So that could be in person or virtual. If you're in the US, we just have the online training courses right now. But again, they're free and anyone can register. So you can email us at that email up there, or go to our website, vancouverhumanesociety.bc.ca/trauma-informed-training. And then if you'd like to learn more about Guelph Humane Society Cares, there's the link there for you as well. A big thank you to everybody who came out. You should still get a recording for this, and I do believe that the recording can be shared. So if you have people who didn't get to register, you should be able to forward that, and that should work. I'm just going to check the chat here. Getting some messages. Thank you, thank you. You're very welcome. Thank you so much for coming. And thank you as well, Katherine. Is there anything that you'd like to share just before we go?
No, I think just a huge thank you to you and Katrina for helping to, or for facilitating this, and for kind of starting this discussion. I think it's so important to have, and it's so great to think that that we're all very sort of united in wanting to have this dialogue and this discussion. It's been really fun, so I really appreciate it.
Definitely. It's always a pleasure and a great opportunity to connect with each other because that is basically the goal here, trying to create a community of support. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and log off. And if anybody has any questions, please feel free to email me or reply to the automated email you'll probably get after this from Livestorm, our software. Thanks again, everybody, and I hope you have a wonderful week. Bye, Katherine.
Thanks, Sarita. Bye.